said throughout this course, nobody seems to want to believe me, however. This is the easiest class you will ever take as an undergraduate in psychology. It's the easiest class in the world. Things are very straightforward. There are facts that we're dealing with. I don't even use that word. In fact, when folks in basic research skills writing their paper fact, I exit out, make all kinds of mean, nasty other comments about it. This place, we are dealing with facts. Everything is cut and dry. There's an exact answer. There's none of that it depends, blah, 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 blah mess. It's the answer is 4. You know, we have an actual answer to it. So it's very cut and dry, very logical and reasonable. Unlike everything else within psychology. This is very, very clear cut. To build upon that idea of how easy this is, we now move into inferential statistics, which is all based upon the idea of probability. How likely is something to happen? How likely is it for something to happen? You know, Warren Buffett made that $1 billion perfect bracket bet. He said, hey, if anybody gets the perfect bracket, I'll give them $1 billion. Now, he's one of the wealthiest people in the world. You know, $1 billion he wouldn't really miss, to be honest with you. It helps become, you know, I guess he pulled himself up from his own bootstraps, being the son of a senator and grandfather, got worked his way up and as working at a grocery store that was owned by his grandfather. But anyway, and off to Harvard with him. But anyway, because that's where his family had gone. But anyway, so he had all that money, but he knew that he wasn't going to lose that money, that debt, because the probability of somebody getting a perfect bracket was crazy astronomical. There was huge odds against anybody getting a perfect bracket, having to correctly pick every single game. It simply was not going to happen. It'd be more likely that you're going to get struck by lightning while being eaten by a shark in Iowa. It just was not going to happen. Probability. Just everybody's been talking about this probability stuff. Crazy. So it's all based upon probability, which you have been dealing with, been taught about, learned about since kindergarten. That's what this is from. This is Animals in the Mitten probability split spinner. I didn't create this. I'm not that creative. Not that artsy-fartsy. This is to teach kindergartners about probability. So again, there is nothing that we're going to talk about in here today that you have not been exposed to from the word go. Kindergartners understand it. So this is not something, I can't understand this probability stuff. BS. You've been understanding it since kindergarten. Just because I want to toss some big words at you doesn't mean that your brain shuts down and I can't learn it. If that's the attitude you approach this with, then yes, you are screwed. If you're going into this with the idea that I can't learn this, then yes, you're doomed. That is true. But there's absolutely no reason for that belief. There is no reason for that belief. Okay, so we've got 8 animals here in the mitten probability spinner. 8 animals. I'm not exactly sure what they are. I think that's a mole. I'm not sure what that is. That's a mole, I think. Hedgehog? It's a sweet honey badger that doesn't give a damn. Mouse, I suppose. Little guy from the Geico commercial. Some owls aren't that smart. Our friend Sally's coming over here. Who? What are you talking about? Alright, so what's the probability? What's the likelihood? What's the chance that we have that if we were to spin this wheel round and round she goes, that it would land on Bunny Rabbit. 8 possible outcomes. Bunny Rabbit is one of those. So 1/8. So percentage-wise, it'd be 1 divided by 8, whatever the heck that is. I don't care that stuff around in my head. 1 divided by 8. So there is about a 13% chance that it would come up Bunny Rabbit. Cool. Probability that it would come up one of these animals on the right here, the hedgehog, owl, mole, or bear. It's 4 of 8. That's 4 possible outcomes of the 8 total outcomes. So there's a 50% chance that it would be one of these animals on the right. Which one? If you were betting somebody, hey, I tell you what, I bet you $10 that if I spin this, it'll come up Bunny Rabbit. And if I'm right, you give me $10. If I'm wrong, I give you $10. Did you take that chance? Yeah. It's 1 in 8. You have 13% chance. If you're a gambling type of person, then sure, that's pretty good odds. You spin it, and it comes up Bunny Rabbit. Ha ha! Give me $10. Tell you what. Double or nothing. It comes up Bunny Rabbit again. You give me another $10. Which I think is $20. But anyway, or I give you your money back. So you either, let's do it again. You do it again, try to get that $10 back. Sure, I spin it again, and it comes up Bunny Rabbit again. Ha ha! Now you give me $20. Tell you what. $50. You give me $50. $50. Or if I spin it and it comes up Bunny Rabbit again, you give me $50, or I give you all your money back. Sound good? All right. Spin it again, it comes up Bunny Rabbit. Now at this point, you have probably come to the conclusion that, wow, this person's really lucky. No, you come to the conclusion, this is rigged. You're ripping me off somehow. Right, because it's such a rare, odd occurrence. That simply is not going to happen. That just, by chance alone, you would not expect that event to occur. It's so rare an occurrence that there must be something weird about the situation, and the most likely weirdness about the situation, in this case, is that the person is ripping you off. That in a nutshell, is the second half of this course. We're going to, essentially, the whole process of experimentation, at its most basic level, we get 2 groups. One group is treated one particular way, the other group is treated a different way, and we compare the two to see how similar or dissimilar they are. And we look at how likely, when we find a difference, how likely is that difference to be due to chance? Is this a difference that you would just expect by chance, random variation? Or is that difference so weird and bizarre, like coming up rabbits 3 or 4 times in a row, that you go, wait a minute, something's weird or strange here. That's it. That's everything that we're doing. That's everything that we're doing here in the second half of the course. Now there's a whole bunch of terminology and stuff that's dealt with along with that we deal with along with it. We'll have names and for all those different little things. We'll talk about type 1 error, type 2 error, null hypotheses, alternative hypotheses, and there'll be the calculations of those probabilities. But at its core, that's all we're doing, is saying whether or not this pattern we're seeing here is typical, one you'd expect to see by chance, whether there's something weird going on here. Is this such a rare occurrence that it's unlikely to be due to chance? Now, the textbook in Chapter 8 spend some time talking about how to calculate probabilities for particular events and that sort of thing. And I'm going, and certainly it's up here and I will very quickly present it. But I'm actually not going to do much with it beyond what's in the textbook, so I'm really not going to spend much time on it here in class. Probably might have something on the homework or whatever about it. Otherwise, it's something we'll move along and not deal with necessarily. The more important idea is not so much the ability to calculate the probability, but to understand what we mean by the likelihood of some event happening. The idea that there's a 1 in 8 chance that it's going to be bunny rabbit, for example, which works out to 13% chance. All right, so all this stuff, this is just the outline of the chapter, that kind of thing. So let's talk about inferential statistics. Obviously, that's what we're dealing with here. So let the Hypnotoad here explain to you about inferential statistics for those who are future Ramen viewers. All right, so the whole idea of inferring is we're going to study a sample, and then from that group, try to make a statement about the population. We study a sample, try to make a statement about the population. That's called inferring. We're going from the specific to the general, inferring to the general. As opposed to other situations where you deal with the general to make a statement about the specific. That's deduction. Deducing. In this case, we're inferring. So, inferential statistics. Now, as we talked about back in the first chapter, there's two components to this. One is parameter estimation, where you study the sample with the idea of trying to get the exact quantities in the population. So, in public opinion polling, where we'll call, they call and ask you what you'd like them to do. You're going to vote for this person, you support this or that. With the idea when they study that 700 people or whatever, that this is the way everybody in the country would feel about something. Which works quite well. Don't doubt that it works. It works very, very well. But we're not going to deal with that for the most part in here. That's really not something that we are going to deal with in this course. Instead, we're going to focus on hypothesis testing. So that's the main kind of thing that we do. Where we're going to, as you know, the scientific method is set up with the idea that you, based upon previous research, based upon theory, you form a hypothesis, an expectation about what would happen in a particular situation. And then you conduct an experiment to test that hypothesis. Well, the testing of the hypothesis, once I think that this new teaching method will have persons do better on some tests. So half the class will get the new teaching method, the other half will get the old teaching method, and then we'll compare their test scores. What we're dealing with here is that's the method of how you do it. We now have to actually take that data and analyze it, and that's what we're dealing with here. We're attempting to test that hypothesis to see whether or not it's correct. So we're all about hypothesis testing. All right. To be able to do this, key from just as part of doing this is that we're going to draw a random sample from a population. Now, most typically we have, generally speaking, we're doing convenient samples. as events get more complex and more events happening, in this case, give an example of throwing dice. The odds of any particular number coming up, say in this case the number 3, with one roll of the die, is 1 in 6. Probability of getting the number 3 with a double throw, so throwing these two dice and coming up 3 on both of them, is 1/6 for that event, 1/6 for that event. It's multiplied. 1 times 1 is 1, 6 times 6 is 36. So odds in rolling double 3. So spinning it and it coming up, bunny rabbit 3 times in a row, because that's what had happened. 3 bunny rabbits in a row. You actually mess with that person in that situation. Are they trying to rip you off, or are they just lucky? Well, in that situation, instead of being 1 in 6, it's 1 in 8 chance, because there was 8 animals. So bunny rabbit's 1 of 8. And there were 3 instances of it, not just 2. So it'd be 1/8 times 1/8 times 1/8. So 8 times 8 is 64 times 8, 512. 1 divided by 512. So the odds of it coming up bunny rabbit 3 times in a row is 0.2%. I think you need to inspect that wheel there. I think it's kind of been set to rip you off. The likelihood of that event happening. So, in terms of, to put this in terms of the actual calculation of it and the terminology that goes along with it, classical a priori probability, that which can be deduced from reason alone, no actually required. Number of events classified as A. Number of times that it can come up bunny rabbit. 1. There's 1 possible time it can come up bunny rabbit. Total number of possible events is 8. So that's our probability of any given spin, it comes up bunny rabbit. The number of events equals A divided by the total number of possible events. That's just really looking at it. The other way of looking at this is from an empirical standpoint. That is, let's go collect some data and then after the fact take a look at it and see what happens. And that would be the number of times A occurred relative to the total number of times. So if we spun it 3 times, it's come up bunny rabbit every time. So that 3 bunny rabbits, 3 occurrences, the probability of the bunny rabbit is 100%. And something's wrong here with that. So it's an empirical, so classical a priori, so sort of, I'm thinking about this in advance without actually collecting data versus actually collecting data. There's research that shows exposing people to nature or to animals
for discrete events. A discrete event, where it's either money rabbit or not money rabbit. Either is the thing or it's not the thing. But for most of what we deal with, most of the research that we deal with, most of the variables that we deal with, are not discrete events. They're continuous events. They're continuous events. So it's not a matter of, you know, may be way out there. Fellow graduate student said way back when in my master's degree program, we called it a hypnotoad, which we all chuckled and didn't realize he wasn't joking. On top of it, some point or another when we do something like that. So we don't know whether it was superfluous, not superfluous, or it's omnipotent, not omnipotent. So I'm combining here chapters 9, 10, and 11, skimming over some of the stuff that the textbook author decides to talk about things called the sign test, which I understand why he chose to introduce and discuss the sign test. I don't agree with why he chose to introduce it. I understand his reasoning. I don't agree with his reasoning. I think it just adds to give you the fact that you're not. And so I think it just confuses so the textbook will talk about things like the sign test. course will involve the exact calculations that we have to go through to make that comparison between our sample to our population. Our sample is going to change. What our population is going to be exactly is going to change. But the whole process will always be the same. That is, I'm comparing this group to what's typical and seeing whether it fits in with the typical or whether it's unlikely to be part of that group. It's weird and without doing it. Okay. Indeed. Emotional intelligence. Are psychology students different than other ECSU students? So imagine here that we've measured everybody on campus and their emotional intelligence. So we know what the emotional intelligence of ECSU students is. And then we give y'all a measure of emotional intelligence, which is a real concept. You haven't heard of it. Anyway, it's a real thing, emotional intelligence. It's about those who have not familiar with that, is the extent to which you are aware of your own emotional states and the emotional states of others, and to the extent to which you can use that information to shape or change your behavior. But anyway, so emotional intelligence. So our sample of students in psychology 300. So we give all of you a measure of emotional intelligence. You're our sample. This group is our sample. And we're going to compare that to ECSU students as a whole. Our hypothesis is that ECSU psychology students will have greater emotional intelligence than other ECSU students. Right? Because that's, most of you want to be some kind of counseling type, clinical kind of psychologist. So it's all about understanding people and feelings and all of that. So emotional intelligence would seem to be something that would kind of match up with that. So you would expect or hypothesize that ECSU psychology students will have greater emotional intelligence than other ECSU students. But of course, we have to test that. So how do we go about doing that process? All right. So a couple of things. First of all, one thing is that we can never prove that something does not happen. We can only prove or find evidence for something happening. We cannot show that something does not happen. We cannot prove that something does not exist, does not happen, or has no effect. I cannot prove any of these things. We cannot prove that Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster do not exist. In fact, there you have Bigfoot riding on the Loch Ness Monster. I cannot prove that the assignment is not in your backpack, that your boyfriend or girlfriend is not cheating on you, that your smartphone is not giving you cancer, that vaccines are not causing autism. Just can't do it. Because there's always the possibility that, I've looked through this entire forest for Bigfoot and haven't found him. He's just really good at hiding. My assignment is due. I know it's in my backpack. I went through my backpack and didn't find it. You go through it once and you give up, right? You go through it, I know I put it in here. You go through it 5 times, keep going through it. You might have missed it. Please use it for every school.
contradicts both the age of the planet and various other things that are speculated within, which are described in that series of stories. There is no evidence to support this. And indeed, so in certain instances, there's evidence that contradicts it. So as far as the book itself, in terms of the age of the Earth and that sort of thing, the archaeological evidence establishes the Earth is much older than that book speculates. So we have evidence there that directly contradicts it. So that's not the age of the Earth. Age is significantly older than what is speculated in that, described in that story. We are, we actually test the null hypothesis, the idea that something doesn't occur, because then we can reject it when we find that it does. So we test the null hypothesis so that we're able to reject it. When we find evidence for it, we go, it does happen because here's the evidence. If we don't find the evidence, then best we can say is that we failed to reject the null hypothesis. We can never accept that something doesn't happen because we just may have missed it. Boyfriend is not cheating on you. We go through this, to test that, we're going to go through their cell phone and look at all their text messages. We find no evidence in there that they have been cheating on you. We don't conclude they're not cheating on you. We go, we can find no evidence that they're not cheating on you. Or we can find no evidence that they are cheating on you. We have failed to reject the null hypothesis. So from the standpoint of our example, our research hypothesis, the reason we're doing the study, what we come into the study with is the idea that ECSU psychology students will have greater emotional intelligence than other ECSU students. That's our research hypothesis. But that's not actually what we're going to test. what we're going to test is the null hypothesis. We have a null hypothesis. HO is this is how we write null hypothesis, because otherwise we have to type out null hypothesis. It takes too damn long. HO is null hypothesis. We're too lazy to type out null. So the null hypothesis in this situation is ECSU psychology students do not differ from other students in emotional intelligence. The alternative is that they do. And it's specific here that they have greater emotional intelligence than other ECSU students. So what we're going to do is actually test this null hypothesis. And if we find evidence that psychology students are different from the population, then we go, oh look, they are different. We reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative. Notice how these are mutual, it's either this or it's this. So we reject the null and accept the alternative. Or we don't find evidence that they differ, in which case we fail to reject the null hypothesis. We can find no evidence that that psychology students, ECSU psychology students, differ from other students in emotional intelligence. Those are our possible outcomes. So we test the null hypothesis and either reject it and accept the alternative, or we fail to reject the null hypothesis. Once we start doing inferential statistics, once we start actually calculating these things, basically your homework assignments will be a series of problems where you will have to give you some kind of research hypothesis. You'll have to state the null and alternative hypothesis, and then you'll have to conduct the analysis to make and decide whether you reject the null and accept the alternative or fail to reject the null. Yeah.
Down there at the bottom with a possible outcome, are those three different outcomes or
two? Yeah, if you're going to reject the null, then the alternative is you accept the alternative. Or you fail to reject the null. There's only two things that can happen. Okay. So let's imagine that we've done this. We have given an emotional intelligence test out to students as a whole. We have a mean of 4.23, a standard deviation of 1.73. For psychology students, the sample here, we have a mean of 4.58 and a standard deviation of 1.43. So the question is this particular event, this thing that we found here, there is a difference. 4.23, 4.58, that's certainly just, 4.58 is certainly greater than 4.23. The thing is, though, is that difference larger than what you'd expect it to be just by chance? Or is there something weird going on? If we measure the height of this class versus the height of the next class that comes in, it's certainly not going to be the exact same measurement. They're going to be different. The question is whether or not the difference is so large as to be, wow, that's really weird, or whether it's, or whether it is a, excuse me, whether it's so large that it's really weird amount, or whether it's, well, that's a difference you'd expect just by chance alone. Because, again, everybody's not exactly the same. So, that's our situation. We've got all the students on campus. This is over 2,000 people. And then you've got this room full of people, about 15 or so. So we have to determine whether this event is typical or atypical. Okay, so we have our population. That's all of those psychologists, all students. And we've got to compare our sample to that population. Before we do so, though, we've got to think about a couple of things. Because before we do it, we can't can't just kind of make the comparison and go, oh, look, they're different by this amount. I'm going to decide that they're different. We have to have some kind of rule in advance to let us know, what. We're not going to do it if it's too expensive. How much does it cost? Oh, it's $25. That's not too bad. Yeah. So our decision rule is going to be here that the probability of event occurring by chance is less than 5%. That's why, in case you were wondering why I kept using 95% before, because that's what we all end up using. 95%. But you know what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 12 words. It's going to take up most of my tweet. I'm not going to have enough time for all my hashtags, my original inventive hashtags. Alpha level. Reject the null hypothesis. So the probability that this difference would be due to chance is less than 5%, p less than 0.05. Probability of the difference occurring by chance is less than 5%. Then we would reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative. If, on the other hand, the probability is greater than 5%, but if it falls into an area where 95% of the folks are, then we're going to fail to reject the null hypothesis. You know, if this is not the first time you've seen the normal distribution. It's not the first time that you've seen a normal distribution and you've been given a raw score mean and a standard deviation. And what have you been taught to do when you see normal distribution and means and standard deviation? You convert that sucker into a z-score to see where they fall on this distribution. So if I converted that psychology sample, if I convert the mean to a z-score, and the z-score falls, when we compare it out here, the z-score is 2.63, right out here, 2.63. What does that mean? Yeah, that's out in the area that really less than 5% of the folks fall out in this area. That's really weird. We would reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative. If, on the other hand, it falls here, or shoot, if it falls right here, right there, that little glitch right there, that's where it falls. Shoot, that's in an area where 95% of the sample falls. We failed to reject the null hypothesis. We found no evidence that psychology students differ from students as a whole. Actually snuck into chapter 12 there. That's one sample z-test we'll learn about in chapter 12. Comparing a sample to a population where you know the standard deviation of the population. All about how likely that event is to occur. So if the probability of event occurring by chance is less than 5%, indicated by p less than 0.05, then we will say that the effect is statistically significant, or that we have found a significant difference. It does not mean that it's important. Statistical significance does not mean this is an important finding. It just means that the difference is unlikely to be due to chance. It may not actually mean anything in a real-world kind of sense. It just means whether or not the difference is, it's unlikely to be due to chance. Again, this is actually a good, it's a little math humor and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, it's actually the case. It's like there's a statistically significant difference here. That does not mean that he views her as that important person. Indeed, doesn't. But statistically speaking, yes, there's a significant difference. There's much more. That's all we have time for today. Which is pretty good because that covers almost everything.